Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. At 28 years old, Emma Brooks had always felt out of place. She was standing outside a fancy restaurant in downtown Manhattan, watching her reflection in the sleek glass windows. The soft hum of conversation and the delicate clinking of silverware filtered through the air, but none of it mattered to her. Her second-hand dress, scuffed shoes, and nervous hands felt painfully out of place in this world of polished perfection. The glamorous city life seemed like a faraway dream, one she could never quite reach. "I promised Jenny I'd do this," she whispered to herself, taking a deep breath before entering. She had always been the responsible one, the one who made sacrifices for others. But today, Jenny had promised her that this blind date would be her big break. At least that's what she had been told. Now, she only hoped she could get through the evening without embarrassing herself. Emma scanned the restaurant, her eyes landing on a sharply dressed man sitting alone at a table in the back corner. He looked familiar in a way, but she couldn't quite place him. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his suit, expensive, no doubt, fit him perfectly. She swallowed her nerves and walked toward him, trying to muster a smile that didn't reveal how nervous she truly was. "Hi, you must be Kevin," Emma said brightly as she approached, her voice slightly higher than usual. "I'm Emma. Nice to meet you." The man blinked in surprise, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at her. For a moment, he seemed lost for words, his gaze flicking between Emma and the phone in his hand. He hadn't been expecting anyone to sit down at his table, let alone someone who looked so out of place. Hi Emma," he said slowly, clearly caught off guard. "I think you have the wrong table. I'm not Kevin." Her face turned crimson in an instant. "Oh my God," she muttered, mortified. "I'm so sorry." She stood up quickly, her heart racing. "I thought you were." "Oh, this is so embarrassing." But the man, instead of getting annoyed, let out a quiet laugh. He placed his phone down and offered a warm, understanding smile. "It's okay," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. "It happens. Blind dates, right? A little awkward to begin with." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to be so understanding. She hesitated for a moment, then slid back into the chair across from him, hoping to salvage the situation. "I know this is strange," she said, trying to laugh it off. "But Jenny has been trying to set me up for months, and I kept saying no. I just didn't want to deal with it. But here I am. Guess I couldn't back out now." She adjusted her napkin, unsure what to say next. "I'm a waitress. Not exactly glamorous, but it pays the bills. Well, most of them anyway. And you? What do you do?" The man raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued despite himself. "I work in tech," he said vaguely, leaning back in his chair. "Coding in apps. You know, that kind of stuff." Emma smiled brightly, her nerves starting to ease. "That sounds cool. I'm terrible with computers. Honestly, I can barely get my phone to work half the time. But hey, I know how to carry a tray of food with one hand and manage the register with the other. That's a skill, right?" The man chuckled, his smile widening. "Right, that's a pretty solid skill," he said, clearly amused by her ease and confidence despite the awkward start. Emma relaxed a little more, her nerves starting to fade. It felt nice, being able to talk freely without worrying too much. There was something about him, something genuine, that made her feel more comfortable. But just as she was starting to relax, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, glancing at the message that popped up. "Hey, Emma, where are you?" "I'm at table 7, looking forward to meeting you. Kevin." Her stomach dropped as the reality hit. "Wait," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not Kevin?" The man's eyes softened, but he didn't immediately answer. Instead, he gave a small, understanding smile. "No, I'm not. But I'm glad. You sat down anyway." Emma's face flushed a deep red, and she quickly grabbed her coat, standing up. "I am so sorry. This is ridiculous. I can't believe I'll just go and find Kevin." But before she could leave, the man stood up as well, holding his hand out to stop her. "Emma, it's okay," he said, his voice gentle. "You don't have to leave. It's really no big deal." She paused, looking back at him, unsure of what to do. For some reason, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. There was something comforting about the way he spoke to her, something that made her feel like maybe it wasn't such a disaster after all. "I'll just text Kevin," she said, still embarrassed but starting to feel a little less panicked. "Maybe we can just have coffee or something." Emma sat back down slowly, still embarrassed but relieved that he didn't seem angry or uncomfortable. She looked at the man across from her, his calm demeanor almost soothing in contrast to the chaos of her own thoughts. He smiled gently as she settled back into her seat. "It's okay, really," he said, his tone kind but matter-of-fact. "Blind dates can be a little tricky." His eyes twinkled with amusement, and Emma couldn't help but smile back, though her cheeks were still flushed. "Yeah, a little," she replied, trying to recover from the awkwardness. "I think I was more nervous about the date than I realized." She took a deep breath and adjusted her dress. It wasn't the best thing she had, but she had hoped it would be enough. "Anyway, I guess we can just pretend it was part of the experience, right?" she added, trying to lighten the mood. The man chuckled. "Sure, why not?" He shifted slightly, leaning forward a bit as he looked at her more closely. "So, you said you're a waitress?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. Emma nodded, a little surprised by the genuine interest in his voice. "Yeah, I've been working at this diner downtown for a while now. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. Just barely," she said with a small laugh. "I always dreamed of doing something more, like having my own art studio, but it's hard to make ends meet. So, I just keep pushing through. You know how it is." She looked down at her hands, the nerves still lingering. She didn't expect him to care about her story, but there was something in his eyes that made her feel heard. "I get it," he said, nodding slowly. "It's tough, but you seem like someone who doesn't give up easily. That's admirable." Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She wasn't used to getting praise, especially not from someone who looked like he could have any woman he wanted. "Thanks," she said quietly, her voice soft but sincere. "I try. Some days are harder than others, but I've got a lot of things I want to do, and I'll get there eventually, even if it takes time." The conversation flowed naturally from there, moving on to lighter topics. They talked about their favorite movies, books, and places they'd like to visit someday. Emma found herself laughing more than she had in a long time. The man, whose name she still hadn't learned, was easy to talk to, and she didn't feel the need to hide behind her nervousness anymore. As the evening wore on, Emma's anxiety slowly melted away. She couldn't remember the last time she had been able to relax like this, especially with someone who wasn't judging her for her circumstances. For the first time, she felt like she could just be herself. She didn't have to pretend to be someone else. "So what about you?" she asked, curious. "What do you do? You said you work in tech, but what's that like?" He paused for a moment, glancing down at his phone as if thinking about how to answer. "It's a lot," he said finally. "I work for a startup developing software. It's not as glamorous as it sounds. Mostly late nights and a lot of problem solving." Emma nodded, pretending to understand. She didn't know much about tech, but she was fascinated by the way his face lit up when he talked about it. "That sounds impressive," she said, her voice full of admiration. "I mean, building something from the ground up? That's not easy." He smiled modestly, clearly not used to receiving compliments. "I guess," he said, shrugging. "But honestly, it's just work. The real challenge is balancing everything." Emma noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, the way he looked away for a moment as if lost in thought. "Yeah, I get that," she said quietly. "It's hard to keep up with everything sometimes, especially when you don't have much to start with." The words came out before she could stop them, and for a moment, the air between them felt heavy. The man seemed to pick up on her change in tone. He set his phone down and leaned back in his chair, his gaze softening. "You're doing the best you can," he said gently. "That's more than most people can say." Emma smiled faintly, but her thoughts kept drifting back to her earlier mistake. She had hoped this date would go well, but now she was wondering if it really mattered. They were still strangers, after all. "I don't know," she muttered, almost to herself. "Sometimes I wonder if it's all worth it. Working so hard, but never really getting ahead." She felt her shoulders slump, the weight of the world settling back into her chest. "You'll get there," he said softly. "Don't sell yourself short." There was something in his voice, something reassuring, that made her want to believe him. She looked up at him, her heart a little lighter. "Thanks," she said quietly. "I needed to hear that." The conversation continued, But in the back of her mind, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She didn't know what it was, but she felt different somehow. Lighter, more hopeful. Maybe this blind date wasn't such a disaster after all. The evening continued to unfold in a surprisingly easy way. Emma found herself laughing more than she had in weeks, the tension from earlier forgotten as she enjoyed their conversation. The man, whose name, it turned out, was Liam, seemed to be genuinely interested in what she had to say. They talked about everything and nothing. Favorite movies, childhood memories, the best places to grab a coffee in New York, and the most ridiculous things that had happened to them recently. Emma felt like she could finally breathe, like this dinner, which had started with an awkward mistake, had turned into something more comfortable, even enjoyable. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel judged. She didn't feel like the worn-out waitress who could barely pay her rent. Liam listened to her stories with a kindness that made her feel heard. And every time he smiled, it felt genuine, not forced or out of politeness. There was something about him that made her feel seen. They had just finished their meal when Liam leaned back in his chair and glanced at his watch. "I'm really glad we got to talk," he said, his voice softening. "This has been nice." Emma smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It had been nice. The evening had started off horribly, but somewhere along the way, it had turned into a pleasant surprise. She looked down at her half-empty glass, gathering her thoughts. "I didn't think this would be like this," she admitted, her words coming out quietly. "I mean, I didn't expect to have such a good time with someone I accidentally sat next to." She laughed nervously, trying to ease the sudden seriousness of her tone. Liam chuckled, leaning forward again, his eyes meeting hers. "I didn't expect it either," he said, his voice steady and calm. "But it's been refreshing. Most of the people I meet are, well, let's just say they don't talk about their real lives, you know? They only want to talk about the superficial stuff, business deals, networking. It gets old pretty fast." He paused, his gaze drifting to the side as if reflecting on something. "But you're different. You're real." Emma blinked, surprised by the sincerity in his words. She wasn't sure how to respond to that. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, a slight blush creeping up her neck. "I guess I've never been very good at pretending," she said with a small shrug. "I'm just me. And honestly, sometimes I wish I could be something more than just this waitress struggling to get by." Her voice trailed off, and she caught herself, not wanting to sound too self-pitying. But Liam didn't seem to mind. He didn't look away or change his expression. Instead, he gave her a soft, understanding smile. "Don't sell yourself short," he said gently. "You've got more strength than most people I know. There's something to be said for that." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't used to hearing such kind words, especially from someone like Liam. Someone who, by all appearances, had everything. A successful career, wealth, status. She wondered if he was just being polite. But before she could second-guess his intentions, Liam stood up and gently placed his hand on the table. "I have to be honest with you," he said, his expression shifting slightly as he